Buenos días a toda nuestra audiencia. Mi nombre es Jairo Colorado, el representante legal de Gentech Biosciences. Hoy vamos a desarrollar un webinar con el doctor Douglas Marthaler acerca de fiebre porcina africana. Y la dinámica de este webinar será presencial, magistral, básicamente todo el tiempo, y al final vamos a realizar las preguntas. El doctor Marthaler es muy conocido por muchos de ustedes, ya que ha sido asesor en Latinoamérica para el montaje y para la auditoría de varios laboratorios de diagnóstico molecular en el sector veterinario para grandes compañías de genética porcina, productores, farmacéuticas. Entonces, yo creo que para muchos de ustedes es muy conocido. Le damos la bienvenida. Él ha estado en nuestro país varias veces y voy a contarles, para aquellos que no conocen, vamos a contarles un poco acerca de él. El doctor Douglas Marthaler tiene PhD en ciencias veterinarias, es egresado de la Facultad de Ciencias Veterinarias de la Universidad de Minnesota, tiene cerca de 15 años de experiencia en el sector veterinario y ha sido investigador y también supervisor de investigaciones en el laboratorio de diagnóstico veterinario de la misma facultad. Su experiencia, entre muchas otras, ha estado enfocada en la detección temprana, la epidemiología y la evolución de patógenos de interés veterinario, tanto endémicos como emergentes. Entonces, ahora recientemente, ha sido cerca de unos 2 años y medio, ha sido enganchado en Indical Bioscience, la compañía que nosotros pues representamos de manera exclusiva para Colombia en su portafolio de PCR en tiempo real, como Senior Science and Technology, es gerente de ventas para Norteamérica. Y hoy pues se encuentra con nosotros para hablarnos un poco, darnos un background acerca de la fiebre porcina africana y los desarrollos que ha hecho Indical Biosciences en el tema de extracción. Entonces, dejamos al doctor Marthaler con nosotros. Muy bienvenido, Dr. Marthaler. Welcome to our speech about African Swine Fever for the Colombian professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be able to share some of the experiences from our European colleagues and share that with my friends down in Colombia and in Latin America. With that, I think we will jump into the presentation. I'll share my slides here. Can you confirm that you can see the slides? Okay, good. It's not showing up on my screen, so that's okay. We will continue as planned. So, as I mentioned earlier, everyone, we're going to go briefly talk about some African swine research and diagnostics that's been happening over in Europe from some of our colleagues over there. And then we're going to talk about some of those solutions that they're using to detect ASF. And then also those same solutions can be used in your lab for common pathogens that we have in swine, such as PRRS, influenza, PEDV. Our agenda today will include ASF strategy, so I'll have experiences from our European outbreaks. And we also then will move on into innovation molecular diagnostics for the lab, some of the research that's been done by the FLI. We will then move into the solutions sections by Indical, and then we will end with the Q&A session. So first, this is not my work. This is not my presentation. This is from Dr. Gregor Swarovski from the Copernicus University. He gave a great seminar and webinar along with Ahmed, who's going to be our second slide deck. And that full slide deck is on our website that we will be sharing afterwards, and we'll send out so you can watch the full ASF presentation that they gave. I have a modified, slimmed down version here due to the limited time that we have today. So, as you know, ASF is a great threat to the swine industry across the globe. As of August 2021, ASF was present in more than 50 countries and was recently introduced into the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So it's become a very, very more of a hot topic for us in North and South America within the past few months. So the outbreak at first started in Georgia in 2007, moved to Moldova in 2016. That spread then to Russia and Siberia in 2017. And then in 2018, it was in China. And then it spread to multiple different countries after 2018. And recently in 2021, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, New Guinea, and the Dominican Republic and Haiti all were positive for ASF. So we know that the global impact is going to be huge, and this will affect not only the non-commercial pig farmers, but also everyone across the globe as we try to secure supply protein sources, specifically pork, for the world. And this has led to also this outbreak in Europe has led to a decrease in the domestic pig inventory in Europe. So between 2013 and 2014, we've seen that there's been a 15% decrease in pork production in Estonia, approximately 9 in Lithuania and Latvia, and then in Poland, there's been a reduction of almost 4%. This is a good thing for our swine customers in the North and South America, as they can then export their swine over to those regions, but it's still a devastating disease to those countries. So the current situation of ASF in Europe as of September 24, 2021, Hungary was leading the cases, and so this is both wild boar and domesticated pigs. Poland is in second with about 200,000, and then followed by Germany, and then into Slovakia. And as the countries are trying to decrease the numbers, they're finding that the main reason and the main spread and prevalence of ASF is due to the wild boar population. And approximately 70% of the wild boar population is infected. So these wild boars, these carcasses as they die, serve as the reservoir for ASF in the environment. The virus, as you're probably all familiar, is relatively stable and active in those carcasses for a very long period of time. And it's extremely resistant to environmental conditions. It can stay up to 30 days in feed material, up to 2 hours in cereal grain, so that'd be grain as well, and then like 3 days in a naturally contaminated environment. So as they're investigating and trying to determine how the virus is being spread in the wild boar population, there's also the potentially that when these carcasses go into the fields and die, you can spread that carcass can be cut up by agricultural equipment such as discs and the tractors, and that could cause that to spread across the field and then allow that carcass also to be uptaken by other wild boar. Another possible but highly unlikely way of spread is through the grain and feed and straw. So those clinical signs for ASF observed in domestic pig includes like a lack of appetite, the increase in body temperature, and an increase in abortions, and single death increase after following the initial days of infection. So let me move my mouse over. You'll get a dark violet when you do necropsy on those pigs. You get a dark violet spleen. You also see some enlarged and hemorrhagic lymph nodes, and you'll see some spotting on the ears too while they're alive. Now, in the wild boars, it's a slightly different clinical signs. You will start to see some foamy discharge from their mouth, and then also see some hemorrhages on the skin. Again, in the boars, there are lesions in the enlarged spleen as well. So they have had some successful methods of combating ASF in Poland. So one of those include electric fences and multiple fencing sites. So they put up fences to protect the farms and also to keep out those wild boars. They have set up zones. So there's white zones, so areas that are the density of the wild boar population should be to 0. So to get rid of all those wild boars, and to do that, they use a couple different methods. They will use a chemical repellent. So basically that will keep the pigs away. But they also have introduced hunting. So they do have paid other hunters to come out and do some night hunting, and they will use a helicopter with a sniper, and then also drive around just to hunt the wild boars to reduce the number of that wild boar population. And then they've done big campaigns for the pig producers, those hunters, and also for those vets, letting people know not to move the pigs around from different sites, but also to try to eliminate the wild boar when they see them. Some of the main drivers of the spread in Poland, based on Grzegorz' experience, there's 2 reasons. One, it comes back to relaxed biosecurity measures. So you want to always ensure that biosecurity is the top of the top, and then that wild boar population is serving as that reservoir. So some of those non-compliance with the biosecurity rules include handling pigs that are kept from other species, so cattle and horses. They're moving from one places where cases of ASF and wild boar have been confirmed, and then moving those domesticated pigs to another site. Some of the farms may not have fences or use disinfectant to help mitigate the spread of ASF. Human activity can contaminate areas. So if you're in an ASF infected site and then do not change your booties or do not change your shoes, you could take that ASF particle to another farm. And then there's also illegal movement of pigs of unknown origin. So that was the initial cause of the spread of that epidemic already in Poland. So pigs were moved from one region to another, transmitting that virus. And then, as always, the ASF is in the wild boar population. So they are continuously trying to reduce the numbers of wild boar in the areas to help mitigate the spread of the clinical disease of ASF in Poland. So that was just a brief version of what Grzegorz had presented. He had a lot more to give, and there's a great presentation online. I invite you to go and check that out. But I wanted to move on into some of the innovative molecular diagnostics that they're doing at the LFI, which is the governmental laboratory in Germany. So Ahmed Algar is the individual who presented this work, and this is based off a publication that he has put out there. I believe last year it was published. So their goal of their study was to develop and establish and evaluate novel molecular diagnostic platforms to improve and speed up the sensitivity and detection of African swine fever virus. So they wanted to be able to develop methods that could be faster, maybe field applications, so that we can really detect if the pigs are positive and then help to mitigate the spread of that disease by movement of pigs. So to do this, they did an infectivity study to generate samples, and they used a few different genotypes of ASS, including 2, 11, and 13. They collected a variety of different samples. They wanted to look at which sample type was also better for detecting ASF. So they collected ETA blood tubes, serum, oral swabs, and chewing ropes, so oral fluids, at different time points in the infection. They wanted to evaluate a couple different workflows. So DNA extractions, they used the Kaya-amped spin column, and they also used the Kingfisher instrumentation. They also looked at the IndiMag 48S system from Indical, so our company, and that system extracts 1 to 48 samples, so it's very flexible. They also wanted to use and investigate pre-filled cartridges, so making it easier for that lab to extract those samples and then get those results out to the producer and to the veterinarian. And then lastly, they looked at a tissue lysis buffer, which is a quick heating reagent. They evaluated a couple different real-time instrumentation. So the standard in-house method was by Haynes assay that was published in 2013. There's a EURL assay that has some probes for the light cycler system. They looked at the IndiField 2.0 assay PCR by Indical, and then they also looked at the they looked at our virotype assay 2.0 assay, and then they also looked at the IndiField assay, which is a lyophilized reagent for the IndiField. So we have two different cyclers that they were evaluating as well, the BioRad system, which you may be familiar with, and then also we have the IndiField located on the right, which is a portable real-time cycler that can run up to 9 samples at once. So what did they find for results? So they compared the different sample matrices. Again, that was blood, EDTA blood, serum, oral swabs, and chewing ropes. And they found that blood was still the best sample type to detect ASF in both the initial and late phases of the infection. So in the table on the right, my mouse over here, blood is represented in black, and they were able to see that that had a lower CT value compared to the serum and oral swabs and chewing ropes. I think we all know chewing and oral fluids are a difficult sample type, and it's also a difficult sample type for detecting ASF in that matrices. They also were able to determine that during the later stage of infection, 4 and 7 days post-infection, that serum was pretty similar to the whole blood ETA tubes. And they suggested that the non-invasive samples, so your oral fluids or your oral swabs, could still detect ASF, but it was not as sensitive compared to the other sample types. Next, they wanted to evaluate the different extraction methods. So there was a variety of extraction methods, again, for serum, whole blood, oral swabs, and for oral fluids. The Kaya AMP, they used a couple of kits by Neogen. They used the IndiMag pathogen kit. They also used the IndiMag pathogen kit for the IndiMag 48S as a pre-filled cartridge. We also have that pre-filled cartridge available on the Kingfisher Flex, and they evaluated the tissue lysis solution as well. Basically, all of the methods were relatively compared sensitivity and effective for the release of the ASF genome, and there was not any significant difference between the two or the variety of different methods. What was interesting for them is that the nucleic acid released by the TLR, so the tissue lysis, which is a heating method instead of using a magnetic bead, could be suitable for some labs with limited equipment, such as if they didn't have an extraction or a centrifuge per se. It was a good alternative for some of those other labs. Next, they wanted to compare the PCR assays and the commercial kits. So they looked at 4 different kits against the 4 different matrices, the Perfecta qPCR rough tough mix, the light cycler primers and probes, the virotype ASF 2.0 PCR kit, and then also the IndiField ASF PCR. And when they started to investigate and look at those, they found that they had the highest sensitivity, and the CT values were demonstrated by the IndiField PCR due to the high template volume. So on our table on the right, we have the Haynes assay, which is published, another published assay, the Indical's virotype 2.0, and then the IndiField. So the IndiField on all 4 different matrices, the blood, serum, oral swabs, and chewing ropes, all had slightly lower CT values. So earlier detection of the ASF compared to the other assays. And again, this is due to the increased nucleic acid input in that assay compared to the other assays. But all the assays are equivalent and work very similar. There's a little bit more ease when you're using a commercial kit versus the other published assays. So that was a very abridged version of Ahmed's work. And so I do encourage you again to go and check out that full webinar, and we'll provide that link once we are done today. Next, I wanted to move a little bit into Indical solutions before we jumped into the Q&A. And more importantly, maybe you're not familiar with who Indical is yet. So we have over 25 years of experience, and we keep on growing and adding new and exciting technology to our portfolio. So we were started in 1996 as a service laboratory. So like a lot of individuals that may be on this webinar. And then in that service laboratory, they were making assays, developing tests, and they decided they were no longer going to be a service laboratory in 2008. And then QIAGEN acquired them in 2012. So we are the former animal health division of QIAGEN. In 2018, QIAGEN decided to move into a different direction, and that's when Indical was formed. So we have pulled all the products that were part of the QIAGEN portfolio into what is now Indical Bioscience. So that includes extraction, PCR, ELISAs. That's who we are today. And over the past couple of years, we have continued to grow by adding additional companies, additional family members to our portfolio. So we also have a FOSA, which is a small companion animal ELISA. And then recently, as of last year, we became part of Vimian, and we were listed on the stock exchange in Europe. So we are now a publicly traded company, and we continue to add additional companies to our portfolio. We have acquired Checkpoint, which is a salmonella serotyping company using molecular techniques. Also AirCollect. So AirCollect is an air sampling device technology as well. So no more oral fluid samples, hopefully in the future with swine. Hopefully we can move into using a little handheld device for sampling the air and looking for those pathogens. We are a global company. We have a diverse portfolio, and we include the complete workflow. So we do have sample prep. We have both spin column technology, the IndiMag, IndiSpin, and then we also do have magnetic bead technology. We have the instrumentation with the IndiMag 48S and AirCollect, and a variety of different assays, including ready-to-use PCRs specific to different pathogens. We also have ELISAs. We also have reagent sets as well. I'm only going to discuss a couple of the different sample preps and instrumentation today. If you want more information, you can, of course, reach out to myself, also to Harold. He will also be able to provide additional information. So today we're going to discuss the IndiMag 48S. So that is our low to mid through extraction equipment, and also the pre-filled cartridges for the IndiMag 48S. So these two pieces of instruments really allow to increase flexibility and speed within your extraction. And I have to say the IndiMag 48S is one of my favorite products that we have at Indical. We are acquiring a whole bunch more and adding them, but this is still one of my favorite pieces of technology that we have. And the reason for that is it just really increases your efficiency. So we have modular plastics to be able to go ahead and extract a variety of different number of samples. And I'll get a little bit more into detail of that. It really helps increase your workflow flexibility. You can either, one, free up an individual from running spin columns. So that person who is running spin columns can go ahead and then make that PCR. Or two, if you're running a high throughput lab with, per se, maybe a Kingfisher and batching samples and holding samples to run that run because you're using all those plastics, you could just now run those samples as they come in and then get that ready, get it on that PCR faster, and get those results out faster for the veterinarians and for the clients. And ultimately, it's pretty simple. It's really easy. It's got a nice user interface, easy setup, comes preloaded with programs. You can use it with other chemistries. It's just a great little device. So it's a really compact instrument. It is 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.5, which I understand now. I should have changed that because the United States does not use the metric system like it should, at least in our normal everyday life. So on the next slide does have the dimensions in centimeters. It has a user-friendly interface. So it's a touchscreen interface, so you can select the protocols you need and hit run. You can also add your own customized protocols, or I can help you add your own customized protocols. It also has UV sterilization, so that's a great feature. So you go to the sterilization screen, push the UV light on, and then it will illuminate and decontaminate the instrument if, per se, there happened to be a spill. Also, it has a great safety feature that if you open the door when the UV light is on, the UV light will automatically turn off. So protecting your lab and yourself from any UV contamination or lights. Go ahead, just close that door, and then you can go and press the start screen to start your decontamination. And again, as I mentioned before, we have those modular plastics that work great, that you can use to extract the specific number of samples that you need. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. But first, before we go into the plastics, just wanted to compare the size for everyone in the audience. So it's about half the size of a Kingfisher Flex. So the IndiMag is 36 centimeters by 42 centimeters by 49 centimeters. It's really small. I was surprised at how small it was. So I know in every lab that bench space is hard to come by. So this will take up very, very minimal space on your bench and then allow you to do other activities with that bench space. The modular plastics really make this instrument flexible and a great cost savings for the lab. There are 3 different modular plastics available. We have the single sample and plastic. So with the first well, you would have your lysate with your sample, wash 1 and wash 2 and elution. And then that comes into, that also has an 8 sample block as well. So similar format, you would have 8 samples here with lysis and then 8 samples with wash 1, wash 2, and elution. And that comes into a 24 format. So you have 3 rows for samples. So 1, 2, and 3. And then based on the design and what you need, and I know this is very confusing to explain, and we do have a video that I will also link as well at the end so that you can go ahead and watch the video on how to use the flexibility of the samples. You can run the single samples. There's a little holder that you put your single samples in. And then you can also run, the 8 sample block. You could run, say if you had 8 samples, you could run it this way. If you had 16, you can put another block in. If you have 24 samples, you have 2 options. You could run, sorry about my mouse here. You could run 3 8 sample blocks, or you could run 24. If you wanted to run 32 samples, you can run a 24 sample block and an 8 sample block here. Or you could run it as displayed here. And to run a full 48, you just use 2 of these 24 sample blocks. So 24 samples in this here, and then 24 samples here. So it really does lead flexibility for the lab and the ability to run the samples that need to be run without wasting a ton of plastics. And I know wasting a ton of plastics gets to be expensive using the Kingfisher Flex. With the IndiMag 48S, the chemistry that we recommend for the instrument is the IndiMag pathogen. It runs about 34 minutes to 31 minutes on the IndiMag 48S. Can also be run on a variety of instrumentation too. So not only on the IndiMag 48S, but also on the Kingfisher Flex. and also other equivalent magnetic processors. But the second best thing we've done as a company is we've put this all together for you. If you're familiar with making upwash solutions, adding alcohols, pipetting those out into plates, now it all comes in one pre-filled cartridge. And so everything that you needed is here. So you have your protease K, you have your beads and your wash 1, you have your wash 2, and you have your lysis your elution all in the plate. So this helps reduce your number of hand times and pipe setting steps, and probably more importantly, reduces the potential for errors. So every time we have to pipette, there is that small potential for error. It can save up to 20 minutes by not having to make up those solutions and then also aliquot those solutions out into the plates. It helps reduce environmental footprint by reducing those plastic bottles. So if you remember, all these bottles come in your kit when you get either, say, the IndiMag pathogen or a different kit. Those are all gone. You don't have to worry about those anymore. What comes in your kit here is you would have your sample blocks pre-filled with all your reagents, and then you have a single bottle of the lysis solution. So super easy, plus also got rid of all that extra plastics. And this comes in a variety of different formats. So we do have the 8 sample format in the bottom here. And then we do have the 24 sample format. And we also do have it available for the Kingfisher flag. So if you happen to be doing and working through an outbreak, so the US is going through a high path influenza outbreak, and so having those pre-filled Kingfisher plates have helped the labs increase the efficiency and generation of results for their clients. Let's had a question that come up prior about why hasn't this technology been utilized earlier? And honestly, technology keeps on advancing and gets better. So I think even if you've been in the lab for a while and done PCR chemistry, we used to do multiple steps. You make your cDNA first and then do your RNA. And as technology's progressed, it's gotten faster, it's gotten simpler. And same with here, we had to do the research and development to make sure that we could put all these chemistries together in this tube without having any reduction of sensitivity. And we have demonstrated that we've compared the manual and the fill version. So we have the manual here and the pre-filled cartridges, and they're almost identically similar results. So very similar in results, same performance, but you also just save that time from having to pipette all those samples, or excuse me, all those reagents. It's a great device. I love it. I love the simplicity and how easy it is. I wish it would have been available when I was in the lab pipetting thousands of samples, but now I just get to share that exciting and awesomeness with you guys here. Lastly, as we move on, I just wanted to highlight a few of our other assays in our swine portfolio. So we do have an African Swine Fever. Currently, we have the ASF 2.0 PCR kit, so that comes as a kit. In the future, later this year, we will have the reagent sets available. So we will have the primers and probes available. We have influenza A PCR. So we have 2 different formats for that. We have a real-time PCR as a kit. So I should define that a kit has everything you need to run the assay. So the primers and probes are mixed with the master mix. You get the positive and negative control. Our reagent sets are slightly different. The reagents only include the primers and probes. And then we have chemistry that you buy separately with that. It's a format that can be used in the US due to regulations. So that's what a lot of the companies in the US sell. We also have the swine coronavirus panel. So depending on what you're looking for, we do have the PDV, TGV, PCR kit, but we also have the triplex. So PDV, PED, TGV, and Delta coronavirus reagents as well. So you pick up Delta coronavirus with that set. Classical swine fever is a PCR we also have. And then we also have 2 versions of the PERS kit. We have the PERS kit that's currently being used by quite a few customers in Colombia, but then we also have the reagent sets that is being used in the US. Lastly, for the swine portfolio for PCRs, we do have the porcine circovirus type 2 and type 3 reagents available. We have a variety of different ELISAs as well. We have a classical swine fever, we have the PRRS, we have a salmonella as well. So if you are interested in reducing salmonella within the herd, toxoplasmosis as well, trichinella, and then Yersinia pestis antibodies. And if you have and want any more information on those, please reach out for us. I do have one last slide, a few more slides actually. I wanted to talk about our PCR reagents that go with our reagent sets. So those specific pathogen, say PRRS, influenza reagents. I want to talk about the chemistry here really quickly, and also how you can use it and the flexibility with it. So this PCR chemistry is super fast. So you can get results in less than an hour. They were designed to run on the fast mode of the 7500 systems. And this PCR chemistry has internal control possibility and a flexibility. So we already included in our master mix primers and probes to detect an IC. So that's an internal control, and you can choose to use that whether you spike that into the master mix, or excuse me, have it in the master mix or into the extraction. So how do we use the internal control flexibility? So the first mix I would like to discuss is the IndiMix Joe. So this is where the internal control is labeled on the detector Joe or the fluorescent probe as Joe, so channel 2. And you can choose to spike your internal control, whether that be DNA or RNA, into the extraction or into the PCR. So it depends on how the lab would like to use their internal control. In the States, we've moved to running internal controls in our extractions. And I think that's becoming a trend more globally. Right now in Europe, they're usually running their ICs in their PCR. So it really depends on how you'd like to use IndiMix Joe for either of those applications. If you're going to just use it in the PCR, I would recommend the following 3 chemistries. So we have virotype mix IC Joe DNA, so that again fluoresces and detects on Joe channel 2 and has IcDNA pre-mixed into the master mix. And then very similar, we have IC Joe RNA. So again, probe is labeled Joe, but now it has RNA, so it has an RT step built in. And then lastly, we have IC Tamra. So that's on channel 3 with Tamra labeled probe, and that's RNA premixed into the master mix. So basically, we're trying to unify the systems, and IndiMix Joe and virotype IC RNA can be used with almost all of our reagents, including PRRS, influenza, PCV2-3, and BVD, which is just being launched. And also will be used for ASF 2.0 reagents that will be introduced this fall. And then also we have PDB, TGB, Delta coronavirus is using Tamra. And then if you want to run circovirus type 2 and 3 alone, you can do that on Joe DNA. Or I have a lot of customers that are just running it on here with the RT steps with those RNA viruses. That RNA virus, the RNA cDNA step will not hurt circovirus. So you can run this unified protocol for all your pathogens, and that will only take 51 minutes. But if you need to save some time in the lab and you want to run your circovirus without the cDNA step, you would save 10 minutes, and so you'd be done in 41 minutes here. So really does depend on how the lab wants to work with its lab efficiency and its workflow. But for simplicity, I have most of my customers and labs are running this protocol with all 3 assays. And with that, I will end my presentation. That gives us plenty of time to ask some questions. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the audience. And I apologize for any background noise that you may hear. Apparently, my neighbors decided they were going to cut down a tree.
Dr. Marthaler, no, thank you very much for your nice presentation. And at this point, we will ask to our customers and audience to ask questions if you can. And one question that I have for you is to know, maybe is pointing out to the last slide for the PDB, TGV virus and the other target. Where are you going to launch that kit? It's based on the last slide.
Let me go back in sharing. So, and that's for the PDB kit?
Yes, there's the Pierce, TG, and I think Delta coronavirus.
So these kits, that's a great question. So these already are available today. So customers can go ahead and order all these today. They're all available. And the only thing that will be coming out this fall will be the ASF 2.0 reagents.
Exactly, yes.
We are in the process of finishing up that validation and in-house, so it will be coming. Those will be coming out very soon.
Oh yes. So in my better understanding is just reagents. The product that I'm asking you for is PDB, TGV, and PD Delta coronavirus. Yes, this is the three targets that I'm trying to understand very well. And this is reagent is already available in the in your portfolio.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. I think that we have a question. Let me see. I will try to translate it for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, it says that Colombia is an ASF-free country. What is the probability existing probability that we can have an outbreak in our country, and how do the molecular diagnostic, the Indical molecular diagnostic, will help us to monitor DSF presence in Colombia?
So that's a great question. Colombia, like the rest of LATAM and North America, are all negative, luckily. So it's become a question of when it will happen versus if it will happen. Hopefully when is never, but I don't know. I know a lot of the countries are doing a ton of enhanced surveillance, including the USDA is putting, the US government is putting money into doing surveillance and helping Dominican Republic, and I think also establishing some congresses in LATAM to help, increase surveillance. I think the best thing and the easiest for ASF detection using our solutions would be using pre-filled cartridges. So you can, you can run all those samples really, really fast, and then using the PCR system. So whether that be ASF 2.0, or you could set up, and we're doing a study this summer with putting an IndiMag 48S on a farm and then using the IndiField, which I kind of briefly discussed earlier. So that's a little handheld thermocycler that had the higher sensitivity, and there's those ASF reagents. And so you could actually do on-farm testing as well. That gets to be, there's politics at play with that, because we know that even in the US, testing for ASF is regulatory to specific labs, so not everyone can test for it.
Oh, okay.
But for the labs there in Colombia, I would recommend the ASF 2.0 and the IndiMag 48S with pre-filled cartridges to get those results out as fast as possible.
Yes, to expedite the results to the growers and pharmaceuticals and so on. Okay, that's
and molecular PCR is your best route there, right? Because you want to be able to do surveillance routinely, because ASF can be a latent disease. It can take some time before it shows clinical disease in domesticated pigs. So an ELISA will not work. Well, it's not the optimal tool, because you have to wait for those antibodies to form, and then you can detect it. So PCR is by far the way to go.
Okay, cool. In fact, I was reading about it, and it's 100% mortality virus. So it could create a whole disaster in the industry.
Yeah, it will. But those clinical signs might take a couple days to develop, maybe up to a week. So you could have moved pigs off that farm already to another site and spread the disease without seeing clinical signs.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah.
So that's
Okay.
part of the problem with ASF.
Okay. But now we are seeing that when it could happen in Colombia, but I think that is just based on their regulation on biosafety and borders control and all that stuff. Because in Poland, you showed on your slide that it was the biosafety controls were relaxed and the traffic over known very well known in herds and pigs was one of the biggest causes of this outbreak.
Agreed. And the biosecurity on farms from the customers that I've visited is pretty amazing and pretty tight. So yes, I do agree that biosecurity is your key in Colombia to preventing the introduction and spread of the disease.
Okay, well, Dr. Marthaler, I think that this is basically what we have today. This is the question that we have from our customers. I will switch to Spanish to let them know that we have a link, and of course that you will kindly provide us the whole presentation, more extended presentation to those customers who would like to go more in detail about the slides and the information that you provide us.
Great. Happy that they want to reach out and ask questions. I'm always happy to help too.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You have been a great time sharing with you to get a little bit more information about ASF virus and the potential that we can have an outbreak in Colombia, how to face it. Thank you very much and have a great day. And of course, a very nice flight in returning to your country. And okay, have a great day. And okay, I will switch to Spanish.
Yep, go ahead.
Gracias a todos nuestros invitados, a toda nuestra audiencia que se ha reunido con nosotros para recibir esta información. Les invitamos a que den clic en el enlace que hemos provisto y como bien lo hemos hablado con el doctor Marthaler, vamos a compartir ya la presentación un poco más extensa respecto de todos los temas que él habló acá. Agradecemos una vez más su atención en sacar de su tiempo, de su apretada agenda para compartir con nosotros y deseamos que esta información les sea útil. Tengan una feliz tarde. Recuerden suscribirse si esta información les ha parecido importante, si hemos provisto información que agregue valor a sus actividades diarias. Deseamos estar en contacto con ustedes e informarles lo que haremos en el futuro. Muchas gracias y feliz resto de día. Thank you, Dr. Marthaler. Have a great day.
Thank you for hosting. You have a great day and weekend as well. And everyone in the audience as well.
Thank you.